We did a summary share yesterday, which I thought was actually quite succinct. We only spent 25 minutes doing the share instead of 40 because you guys were already familiar with the concept on the day before obviously the recording didn't work so well. So thank you very much for Chazorah. Marco, I hope you're feeling a little bit better. It might take you a few days, but we obviously did learn also in the merit that you get well. And I hope you just feeling
thank you. I went
Pleasure.
over it. I heard the whole thing. Fantastic. Thank you.
Pleasure. And thanks for joining us today. I appreciate it, as well as seeing all you guys. It's great. Sometimes I only get the luxury of seeing you after the shir because I'm working through the Gemara, the Aramaic, the Hebrew, and the English. All right. So we're on page 882, and we understand the four different viewpoints about how to view the land in terms of value of the debtor's own land versus the world at large. Now we're going to hit a practical problem, that what happens if the person that owes you money for the debt or damages or for a ketubah of a woman lands up in financial trouble, and then after you've come to some sort of an arrangement, they sell those properties in order to recover costing. In terms of the lien on the property on 882, Gavin, you will note there's a note actually on 883 talking in fact, let me just see where it is. It's actually, yes, it's an 8B1, which is talking about note number 10, where it talks about a lien on encumbered property. Remember your question that you asked. And note number 11 talks about a lien on the grade of property, on the grade of land. You get what I'm saying? So there are two opinions, exactly as you said. So it's also changed when society changed somewhat. Okay, so let's get started. 882. The mortgage that attaches to one's properties to satisfy his debt remains in effect even if he subsequently sells those properties. Hence, a creditor can collect such properties even from the buyer. The Gemara cites a brisa that details the laws that apply in situations in which a person with multiple creditors sells his land. Okay, so I'm just going to lay it out here. The rabbis taught in a brisa, if one who owed money to a damaged party, a lender and a woman for a ketubah, sold all of his properties, superior, average, and inferior quality lands to one person or to three people at one time, all of the buyers enter them into the possession of the original owner with respect to collection. So accordingly, the buyer of the superior land must pay the damaged party, the buyer of the average land must satisfy the lender, and the buyer of inferior land must pay off the ketubah. Okay. So what we're saying here is if it's one person bought all the property simultaneously, or three people bought it simultaneously, all of the buyers into almost a situation where the person that's owed that particular tract of land qualitatively is paid out. But the Gemara says, well, it's very rare that one person generally buys all the property at the same time. And number two, successive buyers, what do you mean they buy the property at the same time? Generally, how does this act become simultaneous? So before I go on, what I wanted you to know is that if ever you've sold property, when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, I was an estate agent for a while. I've done a lot of different things, and I can tell you that on all contracts, that the time of the contract is not stipulated. And this is a tradition that goes back to the Gemara. Remember, modern law is based on Talmudic law. And what happens is they're saying, well, it can't occur simultaneously because technically, even if it's in the same day, one person is going to make an offer to purchase one after another. They're not writing at that exact second. And what the Gemara is coming to bring is contractually, there's no stipulation of time. There's only a stipulation of date on the contract. So say, for example, the landowner has a show day and sells all grades of property to either one buyer on one day, or alternatively, three separate buyers on one day Whoever came first in the day or last doesn't matter. As long as they all signed the contract within that day, there's no time stipulation. There's only a date stipulation. And then if 3 different buyers bought it on a single day, or one buyer bought it on the same day, what happens then is the person that's owed their particular tract of land collects as if they owed it to the landowner anyway, the debtor of the land. So in other words, if he owes land for damages, he would pay from superior land, average quality land for the lender, and lower quality of land for the ketubah of a woman. And so to each person that bought the property on that exact day would pay from the tract of land according to what they bought. Now, before we go into a more complicated example, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, sorry, Jane, what do you mean? Sorry, I didn't quite get what you mean by time stipulation. Time stipulation on? I didn't quite get that.
What I'm saying is as follows. Is the Gemara wants to say, what do you mean all 3 buyers bought the property simultaneously? How would that work in practical terms? Okay, because it's not. Even if you and I run a marathon, you would come before me. Believe me, I've seen you run compared to me. You would probably get there before me. But because the race is on one particular day, it's not recorded in terms of contractual obligations of purchase of properties. Does that make sense? In other words, when you look today and you're buying a property, the time is not stipulated where the contract is signed. It's signed, for example, on the 17th of June, 2020 in Johannesburg. That's the offer to purchase. Does that make sense? So in that case, you can have 3 different buyers, and each one buys a different tract of land simultaneously, because what's recorded in the Gemara is simultaneous if the transaction occurred on the same day. Time stipulation was not put down. And in that case, practically, it would make sense.
I thought about time stipulation, you mean that the offer expires by a certain point.
No. The expiration doesn't have anything to do with it, because if they want to get out of it, that's a separate issue. You've got cooling off periods, etc. What we're talking about here is actual offer to purchase, where it's confirmed by both parties and the transaction went through. When we're saying the transaction went through, there's generally 2 parts of a transaction that's needed. There's the shtar, which is the contract itself, as well as the acquisition. There has to be an action of acquisition. But just to keep a complicated situation simple, how does it occur that all 3 buyers, different buyers, purchase simultaneously, is that they purchase it on the same day?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's no question that if one person bought all 3 properties at the same time, or 3 people bought it at the same time, meaning the contract and the acquisition was done during the one day, and the one came in the morning, the afternoon, the evening, it doesn't matter. It's one contractual day. Then it's considered simultaneously by law. Okay? That's fine. So each one...
a seller is not selling, you can't sell to 3 people.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. He has 3 tracts of land.
With 3 tracts of land.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Of course. Okay.
Sure you can. So, all right. Just want to cover a little bit of ground. So what's happening now is we're saying, so there it's not a question. There you just give the tract of land according to what is owed. Damages collect superior. Lenders collect average, and ketubah of a woman, lower quality land. Now there's a problem that's going to come up. What happens if all the buyers bought on successive days? In other words, when we say successive, it doesn't mean Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. We're just showing that there's a timeline, or that there's one individual that bought in successive periods. He didn't have a lot of money to start, so in the first week he bought the first property and then got somebody to lend him. He bought the second property and then got it mortgaged, bought the third. And you've got different time periods from either one buyer or 3 different buyers, where you can discern that the transaction never happened on the same day. All right. So in that particular case, there's a law that comes into effect. All right, guys, this is a Mishnah in Gittin 48b that teaches that a creditor may not collect his debt from a mortgaged property in the hands of a buyer as long as the debtor himself possesses unmortgaged property, even if that property is of inferior quality. So this law was enacted by the rabbis out of deference to buyers who might protest that it's unfair to collect from them when there's still unmortgaged property left in the hands of the debtor himself. This is according to Rashi's commentary on 50b. Only if the unmortgaged property is of insufficient value to cover the entire debt may the creditor collect from the buyer. So as a corollary to this law, it's a tongue twister. Abrasa states that even if the debtor sold all of his properties, but did so in several stages, the creditor must collect from the property sold last, since that property was left unencumbered at the time of the next to last sale, and it was this property that the creditor would have been forced to accept had he come to collect at that time. His first right of collection remains with this property even after it's sold. If this property is insufficient to cover the entire debt, he must turn to the property sold next to last, and so on. Accordingly, if the debtor sold his inferior property last, the buyers of superior and average properties can insist that the damaged party and lender collect their compensation from inferior property. This is according to Rashi. So let me unpack it in Damon language, in simple language. So firstly, what happened is that the person that really owes you money, guys, is the creditor. Okay? So whether they have to pay you for damages or they have to pay you for a loan, etc., or you're the wife that got divorced and he has to pay from the woman's ketubah, that's the person that you actually have the financial arrangement with to start off. So if he's got 3 grades of land and he sold the 2 grades of land from the respective to 2 different other buyers so that he can recover some of his losses, your main relationship is with the person that you entered into in terms of the original contract, which is the original owner of the land, the creditor. So the problem is that the person...
Debtor.
The debtor, sorry, Marco, the debtor. So what I'm saying is, guys, the debtor owes you money, but it could land up in an unfortunate situation. Why is it unfortunate? If he sold the superior quality land, the debtor, in order to gain the most amount of funds, because he'd be able to sell it easily. Kevin?
I'm sorry, I've got somebody outside. I think they've come to do the water. Give me a few minutes, sorry.
No problem, just put it on mute. It's not a problem.
All right, sorry, I apologize.
No problem. So, Michael, what I'm saying is this, apologies. So the debtor owes you money. So where it becomes a very unfortunate situation is where you have an arrangement with them and they've sold the superior quality lands quickly, okay?
Correct.
And the difficulty is there, why would they sell their superior? Because they'd get the most amount of money in the quickest time. Now, you're a damaged party. This is going to leave you in an unfortunate situation because you can only then collect from average land. It's not a great situation. Even if you're a lender and you lent them money and you got paid back the debt by the debtor, as a creditor, he could have sold his superior and average quality land and you can be stuck with intermediate land. So it's not a great situation at all. The only one that aces here is the woman for her ketubah, but then getting inferior land is never a great thing either. To be honest. So this is where it's going to have a problem. So the Mishnah in Gittin 48b, Kevin, are you following, by the way? Arthur?
I don't think Arthur's there.
He might have fallen asleep. He's not feeling well. I took a lot of meds. Kev, are you there? Kevin? Kevin, are you on mute?
Yes, I'm muted because there's construction going on here.
No problem. We Bika Cholim, with the learning house of the sick.
I've got a vested interest in today's show, Damon.
Really, very funny. All right. So, what I was saying is as follows: is now we're talking about a case that he sells it off to the buyer. And I just want to explain, guys, this concept of next to last. So So it's done to protect the buyer. What does this mean? You come to me, I've bought a property in good faith, and all of a sudden I see that I owe money on this property because you never paid your debts and you sold me the property. And what this next to last thing is to actually protect the buyer. So if you come to me and say that Shimon owed you money for damages, and I've got superior quality land that I bought from Shimon, right? I can say to you, please go back. I'm Ruvain. I say, go back to Shimon and kindly collect from Shimon, even if it's average or inferior quality land, because although you owed superior quality land, I, as the buyer, bought it in good faith, and there are lands that are still unencumbered. In other words, he's the one that owes you money. He still has land. Right. So go collect from him. I don't care if you shortchanged. The arrangement you had with him, why must I be shortchanged?
Yeah.
And this rabbis have done this enactment in order as deference to buyers that are protesting that it's unfair to collect from them. If there's still unmortgaged property left in the hands of the debtor himself.
Yeah.
Now, here
even
we
though
have...
It's
yeah?
Okay. Even though it's a fairy land to,
in comparison to what they were entitled to, correct. Even if it's average, damages should pay from superior. So now we're talking about...
Again, Damon? Sorry, can you just briefly go over that again?
Sure.
So you're saying a buyer that buys from... a buyer that bought property that had a lien on it.
Yes.
Or he's still he buys it, then he's responsible to, it's got nothing to do with the seller, even though the seller shouldn't have.
No, that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying yet. Marco, just give me a fraction of a chance to explain it to Kev. You've got the concept. There's no problem. So, Kev, let me explain to you what I'm saying. As long as they're unencumbered properties that belong to the debtor, in other words, the debtor could either owe for damages to property, he could be owing money for a loan that was given to him or to the ketubah of his wife. Say Shimon, who owned the original properties, damaged my ox and owes me 100 zuz. And he sold the superior land to you. Now you own it. You're the buyer. Yes. And you didn't even met me before. And I said, you owe me money. You can turn around to me and say, listen, go back to the debtor because he still has attractive land to sell you. And I turn around to you and say, yes, but he owes me superior quality land, okay? And I don't want to collect average land. You're the one with superior quality land. You can turn around and say, listen, it's not my problem because there's still land unencumbered that the debtor has for you. It might not be the tract of land you deserve. You might deserve better, but why is it that I must give you my tract of land? The rabbis have given me as a buyer protection that as long as there is some unencumbered property in the hands of the debtor whom you originally had the arrangement with, then he must sort you out. If he sold all his property, okay, so then you can come to me and there's something to talk about. But he has property still. Go to him.
So at least he won't be prejudiced.
So that's the next to last rule. The next to last rule is saying, listen, the next to last rule means that if he sold to different sort of buyers, different tracts of land, what it could mean is that the last person to buy, say the last person bought superior quality land and there's two other buyers. I could turn around to you and say, listen, if I was the last person to buy, I could turn around and say, listen, when I bought superior quality land, at the end of the day, there was other land outstanding by the, by the other creditor. He sold to one buyer, and then I was the third buyer that bought, but at the time, I was the second buyer that bought. So at the time, he still had inferior quality land. You've then got to either collect it from the, you have to either collect it from the creditor. If the creditor doesn't have land, the last person is stuck with the problem. Because the first two that bought did so in good faith. At that time, the debtor still had land available. So they bought it under the reasoning of saying, listen, even if there's money owed on this property, the debtor still has unencumbered property. And since he has unencumbered property, any debts that he owes, whether it's for damages or loans, etc., he must sort out.
So it's the duty of the buyer. I must make sure there's unencumbered property, and there's
yes,
it's his responsibility.
Exactly. So in other words, the last person is stuck with a problem, because the last person that bought can clearly see that there's no more property to buy. So he can't turn around. In that case, it's a very difficult problem that he's got, and say, well, when I bought property from you, I saw you had another land to still sell. So at that point, the person that you owed money to could still collect from you. So the last person is stuck with this dead turkey, in essence. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Sure.
6 minutes left.
Yeah.
Yeah, Marco?
No, sorry. I was using sound there, but I've got it.
Yeah, it's actually a fairly straightforward case, because the creditors collect from the buyer before him and the buyer before him. Okay, so in other words,
if you've got, okay, we're going back to that whole story. I was going to say, if you've got a lien over the land, you shouldn't bother whatsoever. You have to say, bye-bye, you guys. I've got no claim over it. But then again, we're talking about grades of land. We're not talking about like.
Yeah, but even if you wanted to, let's just talk about your opinion where there's a lien on the property. Okay, the actual fact of it is this is proving, Gavin, what Marco is saying is correct. It's proven that it's not really a lien on that property. Because what Marco's saying here, Gavin, listen carefully, is this is where it's coming to prove it, is if there's a lien on the property, it doesn't matter which buyer you sold it to in which order, you can collect from that property.
Yeah,
it's not a true lien. Does that make sense? Because either the land, it couldn't be sold then, because the property deed, like the bank, when you when a property is bonded, only when you make your last mortgage payment does the bank cede you the property. Same when you purchase a car, etc. So it's not a true property lien. Marco's 100% correct. This is proving it. And it's on the grade of land, because your arrangement is actually with either the debtor in terms of the fact that he damaged your property, or it's in terms of the fact that he owes you money. And what we're saying here is if 3 buyers brought the properties one after another, in other words, on 3 successive days, all of the creditors collect from the last buyer. If that buyer does not have sufficient land to satisfy all claims, the creditors collect from the buyer before him, in other words, the next to last buyer. And if that buyer does not have sufficient land to satisfy the remaining claims, the creditors collect from the buyer before him from the first buyer. Now, let me just explain to you what it's saying, is that when they buy the property, each of the buyers was aware that the debtor had land left to be able to satisfy any loans that he had. So they bought the property in good faith. And so the only one that really has a problem at this point is the person that purchases the last property. Because he can't claim, listen, I left a property unencumbered for you to collect from the debtor. He's got the problem now. But the guy that bought second last doesn't really have a problem, because he said, yes, I bought superior land and you're entitled to collect from superior land, but there was land unencumbered at that particular point. And yes, it's less land than you deserve, but your arrangement is with the debtor. It has nothing to do with me. He's got unencumbered land. Go and collect from him. It's only the last person that can't use that excuse. And that's done for the protection of the buyer.
In accounting, we call it LIFO, last in, first out.
That's exactly it. It's last in, first out. That's exactly it's exactly it. Last in, first out. That's exactly it. It is LIFO. Yeah. So
if you're a single buyer, you should actually buy the superior quality first, then the medium quality, and then the inferior last.
Yeah, but
so
you don't
that you
always
end up
get
paying
that.
with.
You're right. You're absolutely right, Gavin, but you don't always get that opportunity.
No, I'm
Because
saying if you
superior
do.
quality land, for example, might be more expensive, and you might have a limited funds, and you might need to get a mortgage on that property. I'm saying in terms of strategy, brilliant stratagem, but it doesn't. You can't always do that, because the person might only sell that one grade of land first and then land up in more financial trouble, etc. So next time we're going to see what happens when one person is stuck with all this land and they buy the superior quality land last, or do you get what I'm saying? Or you have three buyers that buy it simultaneously, three different buyers, but they buy it on the same day. So therefore it's considered a simultaneous transaction, and the last person bought superior land. What do we kind of do there? Because then they're entitled to collect from the last buyer, etc. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, how many minutes do we have left, guys, on your clock?
Just over a minute.
All right, guys, I want to thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thanks for having the show later.
And Michael, thanks for bringing up the point, because it shows that the lien isn't exactly on that property, but on that grade of land. Well done, everybody.
Thanks,
and
guys.
I hope you have a good day further. I hope you all keep well and strong.
Refer Shleimer to the guys that are not well, then.
Yeah.
Amen.
Thanks,
Amen.
and you also. Sure. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Ciao.
Pleasure, guys.
Bye-bye.
Cheers. Thanks, Damon.
Yeah, thanks.